ask
the
a
music,
single?
Yeah, please.
Can I just ask a question? That how long is the presentation?
It's up to you, sir.
All right. Okay.
Okay, we are on live.
Shri Gurubhyo Namah Harihi Om. On behalf of respected President, esteemed Rajiv Gandhi Education Society Roan, Shri G.S. Patil Sirji, respected Honorary Secretary, Dr. K.B. Dhannur Sirji, respected Management, respected Chairman, Shri I.S. Patil Sir, Dynamic Principal, Dr. I.V. Kotur Shetty Sir, Scientific Committee Coordinator, Organizing Committee consisting of our Dr. Shashikala S. Bani Madam, Professor, she's Professor, Department of PG Studies in Dravyaguna, Professor Dr. Anand M. Adi Sir, Professor Dr. Shivkumar C. Sarvi Sir, Assistant Professor Dr. Annapurna S. Dambal, Assistant Professor Dr. Raghavendra P. Shettar, all are from Department of PG Studies in Kaya Chikitsa, and the entire staff of Rajiv Gandhi Education Society's Ayurvedic Medical College, Hospital, PG Studies and Research Center, Rome. I, Dr. Sharda, welcome respected speakers, delegates, and viewers on YouTube. Good afternoon to Dr. Vijayamurthy, sir, and the delegates and viewers from UK. Good morning, very good morning to viewers from US and other parts of the world. And good evening to Indians. Namaste. Let's start day 3 of international webinar, Trividham Aushadham, with invocation. I request everyone to join me in the prayer. Namami dhanvantarim adidevam surasurairvandita padapadmam loke jararubhayam mrutyunasham dataramishan vividhaushadhina. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let supreme power create a situation where Sarve Santu Niramaya. Let me introduce our esteemed speaker of the day, Dr. Vijayamurthy, who has taken Ayurveda across the world with his continuous efforts and expertise in research and its application. Dr. Vijayamurthy is going to speak on basically diagnostic gut and brain functions in the treating causes, a scientific approach to Agni Chikitsa. In this presentation, Dr. Vijayamurthy will explore trends in gut function and brain function, testing from a functional diagnostic perspective. He will interpret how the diagnosis of Agni scientifically can be an essential tool in treating the causes of a non-digestive disorder. Dr. Murthy will share his approach to practicing Kaya Chikitsa at his London clinic, the Murthy Clinic, by utilizing comprehensive gut function tests and adrenal function tests. Dr. Murthy encourages Ayurvedic physicians to interpret classics from a scientific perspective while upholding the traditional methods. A brief note about him before he starts with this topic. His qualifications, few of the qualifications to mention. He is B. Naturopathy, Bachelor's in Naturopathy. He is a BMS graduate. Very proud to say that he is alumni of Government Ayurveda Medical College, Bangalore. I also belong to the same college. He is MS in Ayurveda. He has done MPH. He has done his PhD. He has done MAPA. He is GCRN, and he is FRSPH. Great, sir. Dr. Murthy's traditional complementary and integrative health education and clinical background includes training from India, New Zealand, Australia, UK, and the USA. Dr. Vijayamurthy is a London-based Ayurvedic practitioner, naturopath, and a public health researcher. www.murthyclinic.com. He is a visiting professor of public health at the Transdisciplinary University, Bangalore, visiting fellow, Faculty of Medicine, University of Southampton, visiting academic Australian Research Centre in Complementary and Integrative Medicine, University of Technology, Sydney, Australia, Executive Committee member and Head of Ayurvedic Medicine Research Initiative, UK, that is AMRIT, research for the Ayurvedic Professional Association, APA. Chief Scientific Officer, Ayurveda in Health, College of Medicine, UK. Dr. Murthy is the lead for Ayurveda at the College of Medicine, UK. His healing methodology is attracting a wide range of health seekers and patients, including celebrities and members of British royal family. Dr. Murthy hosts a cutting-edge radio program and Unlock Your Health. That is www.vypk.com. hydrio.com. So much, sir, you have achieved in such a young age. Really proud to say that you belong to our state, our place, Karnataka, and you have reached such a great height. Now, without wasting much time, I would request to start your lecture. And this lecture is nothing to introduce much, because my our this department of Kaya Chikitsa is hosting this international webinar. Kaya Chikitsa is equal to Agni Chikitsa. So Kayasya Antaragni Chikitsaha, and that is going to be scientifically proved by Dr. Murthy. Sir, I request you to start your speech, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm speaking from London. Obviously, I'm speaking from home, so it's a very casual environment. I'm actually delighted to be able to share how I practice applied Ayurveda in London by utilizing a science-informed approach to understanding Agni, hence the topic, diagnosing gut and brain functions in treating causes, assigned to Agni Chikitsa. I'm assuming that most of you are physicians here. My postgraduate degree was in Shalya Tantra, not in Kaya Chikitsa. But however, the primary focus of any Ayurvedic physician would be to really understand Agni and to assess the states of Agni in a patient and to treat that. So if there are any questions, please do put them in the chat box. If you're on Zoom or if you're on YouTube Live, please do post them on your comments. And should time permit, at the end of this webinar, I definitely will try and answer some of your questions. I'm also very interested in your comments and your feedback as to some of you might find my way of practicing Ayurveda by integrating classical Ayurveda with functional medicine, maybe a different approach to what you probably are used to in your own environments. So let me go to my next slide. I hope the slide is visible to the viewers.
So, sorry to disturb. Can you please share the screen?
I hope that the slides are visible now. So we know that, both from a traditional Ayurvedic perspective and also, possibly from a more traditional Western holistic perspective, that there's always been an emphasis on gut health. As we all know that all diseases, they start due to dysfunction of the gut. And this is a very important and a basic concept that we all learn when we study Ayurveda. Roga sarvepi jayante mandagnau sutaram udaranicha. So we all know that Agni or Manda Agni or dysfunction of the Agni is the root cause for all diseases, whether we are talking about digestive diseases, which is very obvious, or we are looking at diseases which are not necessarily digestive diseases, could be other chronic illnesses. And even in the Western traditional systems, before conventional medicine, uh, there's this very popular quote: death begins in the colon. When in doubt, treat the gut. I think this is a very powerful statement. So basically, our life, our health, our illness, and the way to treat the illness really is determined by a well-functioning digestive system. This reminds me of what in Charaka Samhita we hear about the importance of food or ahara. Uh, Charaka says that the entire world chases food, or the entire world revolves around food. So obviously, sometimes when I ask questions to my patients, you ask them to take a certain herb, you ask them to take a certain supplement. The first question that they would ask is, oh, is it going to have a side effect? Am I going to have an adverse effect if I'm taking, let's say, Triphala when I'm on a medication for Parkinsonism? So it's very common that as patients, educated patients, we ask this question, is there going to be a side effect by taking Triphala or Ashwagandha? But at the same time, the same educated patient population fail to understand, to question the food that they eat, what effect it has. But if you really think about it, the body is exposed to food and medicine, and mostly in most individuals, I must say in all individuals who are alive, our body is more exposed to the food than medication. But the body doesn't know this is food, this is medicine. For the body, it is a substance which is foreign that then needs to become part of body's own molecule, and the process through which it happens is digestion. So my main point is, when we start to pay attention that what we are exposed to mostly is food, and how our body tries to transform that food into a very useful molecule that's biologically useful, is a fascinating phenomena. And if we start to take our focus on understanding the digestive functions and the contribution of digestive function towards health and possibly towards ill health, we probably can start to understand how we can reverse diseases. And this is exactly what I'm going to be hopefully sharing with you, how we can do that by scientifically assessing gut functions. I have to say here that the reason why I took on the journey of really wanting to scientifically assess gut functions is because when I was doing my undergraduate studies, as many of you who are watching this will have done this too, is there are methods of examining certain concepts. The main concept, let's say, agni, which is, what terms is digestion. And in classics, it says that the way to examine agni is by examining digestive ability. So the Sanskrit quote is agnim jarana shaktya. So assessment of agni is through one's capacity for digestion. Like bala or strength is assessed through one's capacity for exercise, vyayama. So when we think about it, agni has to be examined by understanding someone's capacity for digestion. When I completed my undergrad, which was a long time ago, 1994, I would ask this question to my patients: how is your appetite? Do you have any bloating? Do you feel any heaviness? Do you digest food well? How is your elimination? These are very important questions. These are very important questions to understand if your patient has any digestive dysfunction, or generally to understand if their elimination is all right, if their appetite is all right. But how will we be able to say that we are able to actually assess their agni? We can understand whether there is a dysfunction in the agni that is leading to the diseases. And here, because we are all colleagues, we are Ayurvedic professionals, let's take an honest look at how we assess. We diagnose a disease condition, and then we work out the samprapti. We know that nidana parivarchanam is chikitsa. Removing the cause is chikitsa. And how do we remove the causative factors? By samprapti vigatana. Samprapti vigatana meva chikitsa. By breaking down the units of samprapti. So if you're looking at the journey of somebody who has had a perfect physiological function, to then it has become pathological, and we work out this mapping of from a physiological status to when it became a pathological function to the manifestation of that becomes the complication. So we know the Chaya, Prakopa, Prasarasthana, Samshaya, Vyakti, and Veda, the various stages. But are we able to actually clinically identify if somebody is at a stage of Chaya or Prakopa or Prasara? When someone is diagnosed with diabetes or Parkinson's or autism or depression, we will be able to diagnose the condition and then write the samprapti or mentally think of the samprapti and reason out. Maybe it is the Vishamagni, or Tikshna Agni, or some dysfunction in the Agni, which has contributed to the vitiation of the doshas, and then there is production of ama. Then there's Kavai Gunya, where the doshas are large, and then there's Vyakti, manifestation of the disease and complications. But this is a theoretical perspective that we take. Are we able to actually demonstrate this practically in our clinic is an honest question that I asked myself. And what I found is, yes, it was not possible in the 1990s. It wasn't even possible in 2000s, but in the last 6 to 10 years, because of functional testing, it is possible to understand if there are dysfunctions of Agni, and hopefully that's what I'm going to share. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of why we are going to be testing gut microbiome. So in this slide, you can see that a huge quantity of bacteria and other microorganisms inhabit our intestines, fulfilling key functions of our health and well-being. So bacteria, the total amount of bacteria weigh about 1 to 2 kgs. And today there are researchers who argue that gut microbiome could be declared an organ. It's almost like we are possessed by this gut microbiome as opposed to we possessing the gut microbiome. And the way how our gut microbiome functions has a huge influence on our hormones, our immune system. So in a way, our ability to influence gut microbiome to balance the Agni becomes the key aspect of effectively treating the causes. So 95% of our own bacteria is located in the gastrointestinal tract. So the gastrointestinal tract becomes a very important barrier or an environment, the health of which or the ill health of which then is passed on to the other systems in the body. Like if you really look at how enormous the presence of gut microbiome or the surface of the gastrointestinal tract, which is covered by the gut microbiome is, it can give us a mental picture. So like what you see, these two green patches, these are actually a representation of a tennis court. So like the gastrointestinal tract surface is as big as 2 times the tennis court. So it's like 2 tennis courts together. That's how big the surface of our gastrointestinal tract is, which is covered by the gut microbiome. And our own body to gut microbiome ratio is about 1:10. So the dominance of gut microbiome is about 10 times more than that of our own cells, in our body. So that kind of explains how important the gut is. And many times, for Ayurvedic physicians, we pay attention to agni. And, I must be honest, even if we don't pay attention to agni, let's say, there are 2 types of practices. One practice is where we diagnose a condition, much like a conventional medical doctor, where we identify a disease and we manage symptoms, or we suppress symptoms. Suppression of symptoms is not truly treatment, removing the causes. But luckily, what I've found, when you use Ayurvedic treatments, even without your knowledge, you will be correcting the gut functions. And hence, we are also addressing the causative factors. But if you're not an Ayurvedic physician, if you are a mainstream conventional practitioner, unless you understand the importance of gut and its effect on health and ill health, it is very difficult for a mainstream like thinking health professional to consider gut as the cause for chronic illnesses. So if we really look at the intestinal flora and how it affects our health, it affects our immunity, because 2/3 of the immune tissue resides in the gut. And absorption, it is responsible for metabolism. The metabolic activity of the gut flora allows our body to utilize food that would otherwise be not digested. And if you're looking at the effect of a dysfunction in gut function on ill health, let's take certain examples. You could in fact relate a gut dysfunction to majority of chronic illnesses. But some of the key examples, let's think of obesity. I just want to share this with you that, in London and also in clinics around where I practice, some patients who have undergone a lot of different nutritional therapies and other treatments for obesity, when everything fails, some of them are advised to have a fecal transplant. And by fecal transplant, it completely resets the gut, repopulates the gut, and you can see it undergone fecal transplant, they start to shed weight. They start to lose weight much more effectively than any of the other methods they used. But I also have to warn you that then some of you might think, oh, is fecal transplant the way to format your gut? I would say no. From my clinical practice, where I've seen patients, some of them, they do have an effect with fecal transplant if they have chronic gut issues or other chronic issues. But then, unless you correct their own gut function, the fecal transplant starts to fade off in its effect after about 2 months. So they undergo fecal transplant every 2 months. I mean, this is not my practice. What I'm saying is we can't just think of fecal transplant as a solution we would need to actually work on our own digestive function. And that is very important. We cannot neglect our own agni or digestive function. The other important factor is, many of you will have heard that, see, there's the immunological theory, which is being used to understand conditions like cancer. But there is also the theory of inflammation. And in fact, inflammation is seen as an interface or a precursor to many of the chronic illnesses. And this fascinates me because when I think about AMA, and if you are going to actually measure what are the indicators of presence of AMA, then you can look at various inflammatory markers. And these inflammatory markers, when they are addressed by doing Vipanachana and Anulomana, you can bring these inflammatory markers down, and you can see that there are changes in the trajectory of the chronic illnesses. So that's why I'd like you to think, if you're already or not, is to think of AMA and inflammation. Because, again, when it comes to clinical examination, there is a certain limit. For instance, I look at my tongue or I look at the tongue of my patients, but it's not always possible to, by just assessing the tongue, unless you are very skilled, to say whether they have AMA or not. Just by looking at a tongue which is not coated, can't say this person has absence of AMA or nirama, or even by asking various questions, such as whether the stool floats or sinks and digestive functions, we cannot come to a very definitive conclusion about someone's agni or AMA, should you want to treat and measure. And also, one of the important things for us to understand is the connection between the gut and the brain. So in many conditions, where individuals with autism, and particularly sometimes I see these teenagers with autism, and where they have been given a lot of different therapies, they've been given the right nutrients, but unless we understand their gut function, we won't be able to actually bring about a change in their behavior. And by correcting the gut function, I'm going to share some of the reports and cases, hopefully in this, we can actually see how the gut and the brain are connected, and you can influence by changing gut function, you can actually change one's behavioral functions as well. So, which is a very fascinating aspect because for me, the connection between the gut and the brain is the key to my practice. And I'm going to share in a little while why I think gut and brain, if we take these two aspects as the key to practice in Kaya Chikitsa, we could cover a lot of ground. So concept of Agni, very quickly, I know many of you are very familiar with this because you are experts in Agni. So when I consider concept of Agni, in digestion, I would look at collective regulation of digestion and absorption, which is dependent on digestive enzymes and hormones, appropriate amount of acids, gut microbiota, all of these aspects. So like on the left-hand side, towards my left-hand side on the slide, what I can see is when we are understanding the gut functions, I would like to look at, is there maldigestion? The top left corner. And is there signs of inflammation? Is there dysbiosis, which is, are there unhealthy gut microbiome? Is there an infection? Sometimes we miss some of the parasites through traditional testing. And if there is a long-standing parasite, then it becomes difficult to treat the condition unless we detect that. Because when there is a parasite, all other functions, digestion will be affected, absorption will be affected, there will be dysbiosis, there will also be inflammation. And what you see here as the metabolite imbalance is a balance between healthy gut microbiome and unhealthy gut microbiome. Sometimes what is important in clinical practice is also to note that if there is too much of a proportion of healthy gut microbiome, which are called commensal microbiome or commensal bacteria, that also can lead to certain imbalances. So it is important to balance the useful ones with the ones which perhaps are potentially harmful. Say, this is just how one would need to look at digestive enzymes and hormones, where they work, and appropriate amount of acids, and the intestinal microflora. There are a variety of it, lactobacilli, there's bifidobacterium. It's a whole lot of different kinds of bacteria that populate our gut, and to understand their interaction and behavior is very important. So how do I, in my clinical practice, then measure someone's digestive function? I think this probably is asking, how do you measure? Tell us about it. I do a comprehensive stool analysis. A comprehensive stool analysis comprises of collecting 3 stool samples on consecutive days, and then to send these stool samples to a lab where they would look at all the markers, and they would give me information about whether there is maldigestion, inflammation, dysbiosis, infection, or metabolic imbalance. So it's basically 3 factors that I consider: digestion, inflammation, and gut microbiome. As you can see in this picture, in maldigestion, there's a faint sketch of the gut, and it's yellow. So in this particular patient, yellow means it is not green, which is excellent. Yellow is there are some imbalances, which I'll talk about very shortly. And if you look at inflammation, it is red. So in this particular patient, there is high amounts of inflammation. So then I will know when I'm treating the gut, I would have to treat inflammation. And also when you look at this infection, it is also red. Generally, what I've found is undetected infections, other aspects of the gut, and dysbiosis. Obviously, when there is infection and inflammation, you can expect an imbalance in the gut microbiome, and that's what is seen. But this one, the green bit, metabolite imbalance, what I can see in this patient is there is a good balance between good microbiome and bad microbiome, to say so. So these are the 5 factors that I would look for in the stool analysis. I mean, what I'd like to urge is, like when I was studying Ayurveda from a very classical perspective, we were encouraged a lot to do the traditional Ayurvedic testing. Like even when there was Virechana done, I know of my classmates who would actually measure the output from a very classical perspective, which I think, is fascinating to understand how Charaka, Sushruta, they used any tool to measure. But do we have to use the same tools when we have better tools is the question we need to ask. I was speaking to a colleague just 2 days ago, and I was mentioning to her, look, Ayurveda is not against measurement. In fact, Ayurveda is for measurement. Like if they were encouraging the physician then, when there was no way to measure if the urine had glucose in it, sugar in it, they were even encouraging the physician to say, maybe, taste the urine. If that is sweet, then that's madhumeha. What I'm saying is, we don't need to use traditional assessment methods when we have more advanced, updated methods. It's a little bit like, we are using technology now to talk to each other. Right now, this webinar is possible. Everybody is gathered around the world, and we are all connected together through internet. So we are using technology as a tool. We no longer are sitting under a tree and talking to a group of students. So what I would encourage, especially our young Ayurvedic physicians, is we don't need to imitate tradition. We need to be truthful to the tradition. And to be truthful to the tradition is that we need to constantly update our knowledge. We need to constantly engage with advanced tools which will enable us to practice Ayurveda much better. So I would definitely encourage you to consider doing a comprehensive stool analysis to see if you can understand your patient's gut function or agni much better than you could if you did not use these methods. Also, I'd like to talk to you about why I always go by the gut function, no matter whether it is a bodily issue or an issue which is related to the mind, is because of the immense connection between the gut and the brain. The gut and brain are in constant bidirectional communication through the vagus nerve. And the bacteria in the gut digest the food we eat and create neurotransmitters. I mean, in fact, 60% of the neurotransmitters reside in the gut. I mean, I might be wrong in saying 60%, but a significant percentage of neurotransmitters actually reside in the gut. That's why in Parkinsonism, when somebody is on L-Dopa or different forms of Parkinson medicine to help with the dopamine deficiency, when the symptoms still get worse, instead of actually changing the medications, if we treat the gut or understand the gut, there can be a huge difference in their symptoms, because there you are actually going and treating the causes. So there's a huge connection between the brain function and the gut function. As you can see, as I was just mentioning to you before, a normal brain gut, you can see there is good intestinal microbiota, and there is a good biofeedback interaction communication between the brain and the gut through the vagus nerve. And in Parkinsonism, we can see that the gastrointestinal, there are increased gastrointestinal disturbances, decreased gastrointestinal mobility, increased constipation, increased pain, increased depression and anxiety, increased behavioral changes. And what you really see is the underlying dysbiosis or an imbalance in the gut microbiome. But the moment this dysbiosis is addressed, you can see a reversal of these symptoms. Decreased pain, decreased depression and anxiety, decreased behavioral changes, decreased gastrointestinal disturbances, increased GI mobility, decreased constipation. So when we try and understand the functioning of the gut microbiome, we are really understanding agni, whether it is for a physical or for mental or emotional diseases. I mean, what I would say is, let me give you an example. See, like I get these young children or older people, with dementia or Alzheimer's, who would be on different kinds of antidepressants and many other anxiolytics, which they would be for a very long period of time. But the moment I do the gut microbiome testing and see if there's any inflammation, if there is a lack of absorption, or is there any parasite or fungus, and start to treat that from an Ayurvedic perspective, the need for medication reduces, the symptoms improve. So that is a very clear indication clinically that you are actually addressing the cause. So something easy to remember, anything that affects the gut will always affect the brain. So it's two-way. So if the gut function is disturbed for a long period of time, then it apparently is going to, and obviously is going to have an effect on our brain function. So yeah, as I said, gut produces 3/4 of the neurotransmitters. So it's not just for the physical conditions, but even for diseases and functions related to the brain and the mind, gut becomes a very important aspect. Just very quickly, let's go through, when we talk about Agni, Agnin Jarana Shaktya, Agni has to be examined through capacity for digestion. But Agni is quite a broader concept than just digestion. So if you look at the classics, the normal functions of Agni, Bhakti, digestion, absorption, and assimilation. The abnormal function is Apakti, the opposite of it. Harsha creates joy, cheerfulness. The opposite, Aharsha, depression. Prasada is the normal function, provides mental clarity. Vishada leads to confusion. Dhatu poshanam, tissue nutrition. Dhatu karshyam, tissue emaciation. So this we can think of as what contributes to immunity. Oja kara, production of ojas, necessity for immunity. And a dysfunction in Agni would be ojahara, depletion of ojas. Medakara maintains intelligence, and dysfunction of Agni, Medahara, which destroys one's mental capabilities. A good functioning Agni would provide bala, strength, or vitality, and a bad functioning Agni would result in kshaya, meaning decay or disease. So when we think of classically how Agni has been looked at as a very broad concept, not just whether you have acidity, do you have bloating, are you constipated, or do you have, all of them are very important. They are very good indicators, but even in the absence of that, there can be a disturbance in the gut functions, which is what we can determine through scientifically understanding. So why I think these functional testing also helps is for me to actually many different ways. And when we look at the Ayurvedic classics, it says Ushmano alpa balatvena dhatu madhyam apachitam dushtam amashayagatam rasam amam prachakshate. So the term ama refers to events that follow and factors which arise as a consequence of the impaired functioning of kaya. So when we think about it, so when Agni or our digestive function is imbalanced, every consequence that occurs after that would have to be seen as ama. What I would encourage you to also think of it is, ama is a substance, but not necessarily just a substance. Ama is also a process. So the way I'd like to think of it is like, when everything is functioning well physiologically, that is a state of balance. But when there is an imbalance, then that would be ama. So before a disease actually manifests, a physiologically sound system would have to be disturbed, which then develops a physiological dysfunction. As Ayurvedic practitioners, we have the strength to identify when there is a physiological dysfunction before it has become a disease. Even when it has become a disease, by identifying the physiological imbalances which led to the causation of this disease, we can reverse the modifiable factors. And interestingly, in 2016, in Netherlands, they looked at a research study where they actually studied 1,100 people. They collected the stool samples of 1,100 people, and these are healthy individuals. And they looked at is there a difference between the gut microbiome of one individual to the other? And what actually contributes to such a difference? Let's think of COVID now. See, even in COVID, everybody is vulnerable because we are all exposed to this possible virus. Should we not maintain social distancing? We are exposed to. But that doesn't mean that everybody contracts. Even if they contract, it may be asymptomatic. Even if it's symptomatic, they might recover differently. Some people's conditions might worsen, others might recover. So what actually, if you think about it, may be responsible for such a difference in our tendency to catch a virus? I'm just saying COVID, it could be any other virus. Most viruses are opportunistic, as you know. And the consequence of that. And a speculation that I would make is really our gut microbiome, our gut health, our agni. And when we look at this research, which was done in 2016, actually there is an 18.7% variability between every two else. There will be a variability of about 19% of our gut microbiome. What's it dependent on? The variability is dependent on 60 factors come from dietary factors, what we eat. 19 of them are related to medications. And as we know, a lot of patients that we see today have either taken medications or are on medications, and many of them are on long-term medications. So that will have an impact on our agni or gut microbiome. So this is important to recognize. So in Ayurveda, we say that, I just went through a slide where I have described the proper functions of agni. Ayur, Varnam, Balam, Swasthyam, Utsahopachayo, Prabha, Ojas, Tejo, Agnaya, Pranas, Chokta, Dehagni, Hetukaha. So Agni is responsible for all of these factors. Like if you look at gut microbiome, it helps in promotion of our immunity, modulation of bone mass density, promotion of angiogenesis, development of training the immune system, biosynthesis, breakdown of food, many other factors. And what happens when this agni is not functioning well? We also know that Vishamo dhatu vaishamyam karoti vishama pachan tikshno mandendano dhatu vishoshayati bhavakaha. So mandagni, tikshnagni, or vishamagni is going to create these imbalances. So in my practice, what I look at is, how do I understand whether there is manda agni, tikshna agni, or vishama agni, more from a scientific perspective? So I'm going to share some of the reports with you so you can see how you can test this. What I have found is the most effective clinical outcome across all disease spectrum can result from normalization of gut function. Always treat the gut. And if you fail to treat anything else, by treating the gut, you can see a far more effective clinical outcome. And when I was thinking about a proper representation for my practice of Ayurveda here, if you look at my logo, it has got two circles, and one circle is the copper circle, which is bright orange colored, and the other circle is silvery, and they meet together at some stage. So when you really look at it, what I mean is, the copper It really represents agni, it represents the body, it represents metabolism. And the silver circle, it represents the nerves uh, and the mind. So it is somewhere our agni, our mind, the intersection, we sit somewhere. And depending on how it is functioning, we express certain diseases. And by correcting our agni and by correcting our brain functions through correcting the agni, we can actually optimize our health. So that's the reason why I have come up with this logo, which are two circles that represents the functions of the body and the mind. So coming back to, when you do a comprehensive stool analysis, so this is what I'm looking at. So it gives me a scoring on 5 different aspects. Let's look at the first one, which is maldigestion. So when you look at the key, less than 2, low means need support. 2 to 3 is optimal need for support. 4 to 6, moderate need for support. 7 to 10 is high need for support. And let's look at 5 different aspects. The digestive support. So in this person, it is 5, which means that it is in the yellow range because there is less pancreatic elastase. Generally, when there is less pancreatic elastase, that means that the person really lacks digestive enzymes. This is where I would give more of the deepness and also fermented food like takra. And it talks about, the hydrochloric acid, bile salts, so encouraging bile secretion, encouraging enzymes would be what you can determine. So when I do this through Deepana, then when I do the test again, I'm hoping to see if the score on maldigestion has improved through a stool test. Like, has it come now to 2 or has it come now to 1? Then I have done my job. Then the second part, if you see, is inflammation. And inflammation, so generally, when you can see calprotectin as a marker, that generally is an inflammatory bowel disease. Like how we might treat something as an IBS for a very long time, but we wouldn't know whether it is an IBD. So this is a very clear indication for me that this is IBD and not just IBS. When I see in this patient, inflammatory markers are 10. So that's where I would go for elimination diet. That's where I would use Ayurvedic dietary approaches of langana, intermittent fasting, or the foods that we use karma, like during paschat karma, to keep it lagu, to encourage the agni to get back to its normalcy. The third part that I look at is dysbiosis, which is a very big part, is looking at whether there is an imbalance between healthy gut microbiome and unhealthy gut microbiome. And here again, it is 10. So this is where I would be looking at, not just prebiotics, but also probiotics. And you might think from an Ayurvedic perspective, Triphala, Trikatu, they really act as very good prebiotics because they got very high fiber content that the bacteria chews on and populates the gut very well. That's why, I remember Triphala is something that my grandfather used to take all his life. It's a fantastic prebiotic. And all the fermented foods, they are probiotics. And we have such a tradition, both in India and also in the West, of the fourth aspect. It says my internet is unstable. I hope you're still able to hear me. Are you? Hello? Okay. I got a thumbs up. That means, yeah, you're able to hear me. So the need for then metabolic imbalance, the need for prebiotic support. A lot of the times, because of the amount of refined foods that we eat, both in the West and also in urban India, that there is not enough fiber, which can actually lead to a disturbance in the gut microbiome. You know, like when we say in Ayurveda, sarvarasabhyasa, and this is what I think about it. Sarvarasabhyasa then was not actually our wedding banana leaf with 25 different types of preparations. Rasa in Ayurveda was not about prepared foods. Rasa in Ayurveda was about natural foods. When you taste a food in its natural state, what is its rasa? Is it madura, tikta, kashaya, bitter, sweet? This is very important for us to understand. We shouldn't think that actually making a food sweet by adding sugar means we are actually creating madura. We would have to understand food in their natural states. And when I suggest to my patients sarvarasabhyasa, the way I ensure it is really go and eat all colors, because food which is diverse in the colors have these phytonutrients which are very rich and broad. You know, eat rainbow food. So you get all of these phytonutrients, and that would be more sarvarasabhyasa, as opposed to having the same vegetables, the same protein, the same fats, time in and time out. So by engaging in a variety of natural foods, which I would say is kind of manda agni, or where there is ama, is not possible to detect through conventional testing alone. So there, if we change if you change that environment, fungal environment, or candida, then you can see a whole lot of changes in other functions as well. So now what I would like to do is to share with you some of the reports to show you. I have got permission, and some are sample reports, so it should be fine. Yeah, so what I get by doing a comprehensive stool analysis, let me just enlarge it, is this pictorial representation. In my patient, do they have infection, inflammation, insufficiency of digestion, or is there an imbalance? And once you get this information, then you also are going to look at, if you look at this rainbow picture, can you see this black dot? This is where currently my patient's microbial status is. So it should be in the green, but it is somewhere between the yellow and orange, which means that it's not ideal. So there's borderline, like it represents 5% of healthy individuals. So when I do the retesting, I'd like to see if my measures have worked, if it goes to the green part. And also what this test also tells me is, compared to the general population, I have to move this, general population, how is my particular gut microbiome? So I can actually look for individual gut microbiome and see how it compares with the general population. This also gives an idea about how closely I have a gut microbiome like the rest of the population, and what is very individualistic to me. Then we get all the details of, digestion and absorption, like pancreatic elastase. So if you really look at this bar, so in this person, the pancreatic elastase is low, so which is at about 158, where you see the brown square, the dot, I would say. It should be ideally above 200, but it is somewhere here. So this is where, when I do deepana, particularly, or give more deepanas, then it is more likely that this is going to go above and then not going to show me low pancreatic elastase. And also inflammation and immunology. What I see in this person is calprotectin is very high, which is like 145, as you can see, which means that there is an inflammatory disease. And then you can look for short chain fatty acids and butyrate concentration. See, we use in Ayurveda grita and different types of grita. It could be panchatikta grita or bitter geese. Panchatikta, we can see after this testing is whether they have much better short chain fatty acids or N-butyrate concentration. So the use of fats is something which becomes very important in correcting this. And then you look for commensal bacteria, which are healthy bacteria, even if they are very high, as in this, there is Prevotella species, which is very high in this person, which can lead to imbalance, and firmicutes. So it goes on. So it's a very detailed information that you get about your patient's gut function. And also for this person, I have done whether they have any parasites like roundworms, tapeworm, flukes, protozoa, and fungus, etc. So by having this very detailed analysis of one's gut function, you now clinically actually can treat the person with greater focus and making assumptions. Other thing I want to also show you, is how do I understand the brain functions? See, a lot of my patients, they say they are not stressed because they are very used to stress, because they think that because they are able to function with little sleep, they are able to exercise a lot despite lacking energy, they are very busy, they must be healthy. And if you ask them, are you stressed? Many of them say, yeah, other than the usual stress, there's nothing else. Or some might actually be stressed also. Like some might have severe symptoms of anxiety or a long-standing depression or, insomnia, which is very common. But then how do I understand this or measure this? For that, what I do is I will do a saliva test. Wherein I would use adrenocortex stress profile, adrenal function test. And I collect their saliva. They collect it. I send them the kit and they collect it at 4 different times to study how their cortisols are at different times of the day. Like between, upon waking, 30 minutes from waking, 7 to 9, 11 to 1 p.m., 3 to 5 p.m., 10 to 12 a.m. So when I look, when they collect their saliva and then I send their saliva for testing, this is what I get. I'd like you to mostly focus on the one where you see the stripes. What you can see is this person's salivary cortisol functions are okay. Upon waking, the cortisol levels are very high. Not very high, they are high enough, they peak, which is what should happen, because when we wake up is when we need to have more cortisol. So we wake up and we feel energized and we look forward to carrying out our everyday activity. What I've noticed is, if I had more time, I could have shown some of the reports, is that those who are very driven, their cortisol levels could be very high during the morning, which can be problematic. Or those who feel they're completely unmotivated when they wake up in the morning, they need 2 cups of coffee or chai, or they actually don't feel like getting up in the morning, what I generally see is their cortisol levels would be really low, borderline low or very low. And as the day passes, the cortisol levels would come down. And what I've noticed is in some individuals, during 3 p.m., either the cortisol level is very low or it is higher. And then if the cortisol levels remain very high, as in this case, during 10 p.m., that means they actually can't sleep well. They can't go to bed well. I mean, they can go to bed, but then they can't sleep well. They can't actually either initiate sleep or regulate sleep. So for me, testing someone's cortisol function gives a very good idea about their circadian health. Like the first thing that I learned in Ashtanga Hridaya, if you look at the first chapter of Ashtanga Hridaya Sutrasthana, what we really see is that Vagbhata really talks about the importance of cycles. And that's why, the second chapter is Dinacharya, because the flow of the doshas, the dynamics of the doshas is all about how we have a more smooth cycle, how our biological clock fits in with the universal clock or clock of the environment. And our dinacharya and all of those aspects actually encourage us to regulate our cortisols in a way that we are not going to go out of sync with the universal clock. And so when I do these tests, particularly when I do their cortisol testing and their gut function test, my patients are able to understand actually there is a problem. So we could then start to address it. One of the things that I have found is the ratio between DHEA and cortisol. If the ratio between DHEA and cortisol is highly imbalanced, they tend to have more degenerative changes. They tend to age very quickly. I mean, their inflammatory markers will be very high. And what I've found is when their hormonal functions or cortisol functions are out of balance, the DHEA and cortisol levels are out of balance, and I treat their gut, and when we do another testing for their adrenal functions, things improve. And this gives them the confidence and me the confidence, actually, by treating the gut, by treating their agni, we are able to treat the cause, or at least make an attempt to treat the cause. With this, what I would like to, conclude is, let us use scientific tools to understand the functions of the gut, the functions of the brain. And by utilizing these measurable tools and by using Ayurvedic interventions, or traditional Ayurvedic interventions, we can actually demonstrate that it is changing your gut health. It is changing your hormonal health, which is how I believe in a modern day, we can show that we are doing some prapti vigatana. We are not just managing symptoms. Because if I just give certain set of Ayurvedic medicines or treatments and measure everything through their symptoms, there is no difference between a conventional medical doctor and an Ayurvedic physician. We both are managing symptoms by using different tools. But to go one step ahead, we would have to run that extra mile to understand what we believe in Ayurveda is whether the agni is all right. And how do you demonstrate and how do you measure? And finally, I would say, even to buy a car, you would take the car for test driving. You wouldn't say because somebody said, yeah, okay, it's a fantastic car, you would buy it. But then when you are trying to work with a patient, and why should they believe you if you can't demonstrate what you believe in? And when you can demonstrate, why not use it? And if we have more of research outputs, particularly if you do more case studies, which utilizes these testing for gut functions, we will be able to actually demonstrate that there is evidence in Ayurveda for treating the agni as the cause for many chronic illnesses. There are many such researches are happening in the West. At least I work in the West, so I know they may be happening in India. If they are, please do share with me that the effect of Ayurvedic nutrition, the effect of Ayurvedic treatments in changing the gut microbiome. And in fact, there is an entire unit dedicated to treating Parkinsonism in Essen in Germany, where Professor Prushintek, he's a neurologist, actually uses Ayurveda to treat patients with diagnosed with Parkinsonism, but everything through gut health. So I hope that, in our endeavor uh, to show to the scientific community that Ayurvedic way of thinking, diagnosing, and treatment is very sound and it's very systematic, we would have to take a more holistic and comprehensive whole system approach to doing research than doing research which is equating, Ayurveda with conventional medicine. To be scientific, we don't need to always equate everything with conventional medicine. To be scientific, we can use many different tools. And if I, as a single, can use the scientific testing for my patients, I can imagine a lot of you have huge access to huge institutions where you can bring in these scientific testing to, one, establish evidence for patients, to help patients to establish evidence for Ayurveda, and also to incorporate these things into our own clinical practice and teaching. So we now can bridge the tradition of Ayurveda with science. I hope, I've been able to share some of my experiences with you. Because we are not face to face, I don't know how well it came across or whether some of this information was unclear or was useful. I very much would appreciate your comments and questions. Yeah. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. It was really a wonderful session. This is what now the Department of Kaya Chikitsa, people working in Kaya Chikitsa, want this kind of studies to go on. You rightly said, doctor, that instead of comparing the only the treatment aspect or the medicine aspect with the contemporary science and then validating and proving that yes, ours is better, rather than what you have done in that way, if we all are going, then definitely like we, first of all, we ourselves will be convinced that what we are doing is, or whatever is said in our classics is best or up to the mark. So really it was very comprehensive yet very very informative lecture. And as you said that you are not knowing what comments, wonderful comments already have come. Around 150 to 200 comments are there, and all are very happy with your lecture. The slides, the presentation, every aspect of your lecture was wonderful. And I have got around 13 to 14 questions also right now. Already I have collected, and I would start asking, putting the questions from their side to you, and
Sure.
you just try to give some answers for that. I would like to start by a question quoted by Dr. Yogananda. And he is asking, we get see people in Western countries using poop caps. Does fecal transplantation and consuming poop cap is one and the same?
Probably it's based on similar concept. Fecal transplant is something which needs a very strict indication for fecal transplant. It's not something that's done because I want it. So one would have to really be eligible for fecal transplant. But I think because of that regulation, some might actually be taking poop caps which do not have the same degree of regulation, almost as an alternative or supplementing, like as a supplement. But my honest opinion is, fecal transplant works when there is true indication. But having fecal transplant because it's easily available, or taking poop cap is a bit like, I don't know, getting your hair straightened. How long is it going to stay straight? It's going to come back to your normalcy. Therefore, I would say it's better to work with our own agni, our own gut functions, than thinking that we need to challenge it by such extremes as fecal transplant, although there is a very, very important place and value for fecal transplant where it is necessary.
Thank you. Now, next, there are two questions posed by Dr. Anjum from USA. First of all, she has complimented by telling excellent slides and presentation. And then she's asking a question. Can you explain a little bit about leaky gut?
Yeah.
First one.
So leaky gut is it's a common term that's used amongst the general public, and also it is used amongst naturopaths. But then basically leaky gut is, if we are considering the lumen of the gut, the lumen of the gut has very tight junctions. And these tight junctions will prevent any metabolite or a potentially toxic element from escaping the gut into the bloodstream, or any inflammatory marker entering into the gut. So they are like our security guards. And when I expose my gut by eating a lot of gluten, like too much of refined flours, refined sugars, like caloric dense but not nutrient dense food, what happens is these tight junctions, they start to become affected, and they will have gaps. The way I would explain this to my mom is 78, and she asked me what is leaky gut at this. I would explain it's like, my mom, she has lost a couple of teeth. I say, it's a bit like that, like your gut will have some gaps. And when there are gaps, then food escapes. Similarly, the inflammatory markers escape into the gut, or toxic metabolites can escape out of the gut into the bloodstream. So the tightness of the gut lumen is a very tightly monitored function. And when that is not happening, there are gaps, then that would be called leaky gut, in the sense leaks. What does inflammatory markers leak? But the more fancy term for leaky gut, or more scientific term, is dysbiosis. There's an imbalance in the gut microbial function, because it when there is leaky gut, it starts to blunt the villi, the carpet-like structure inside the gut. So that blunting also results in improper absorption of nutrients. So a blunt villi would not actually result in proper absorption of nutrients, even if you are eating good food. And a medical term or scientific term for leaky gut would be intestinal permeability. So what the intestine is letting in and letting out. So it's like our immigration system. So it has to really let in only those who are safe, and it shouldn't let in those who are not safe. So our intestine has that regulatory role for immunity and many other functions. So that's leaky gut.
Okay. Our next question is, are you doing comprehensive stool analysis and saliva test for all your patients?
I encourage them to do it. So I talk to my patients and say, look, there are two things. If you're looking for an alternative medicine, I can start with that. I can give you an alternative to an antidepressant. I can give you ashwagandha. Or an alternative to an anxiolytic, I can give you Brahmi. But how long are you going to take this? If you really want to treat the cause, then in my opinion, by understanding the gut function is the primary thing. In some individuals, where there are gut issues and there are, mood or memory or other mental health issues, I would do both. If there is insomnia, I would do adrenal test. But there's also another test which is called organic acid test. And organic acid test actually looks at 76 different organic acids, which are metabolites of organic acids, and they indicate both the gut and the neurotransmitter health, which I actually wanted to show you. It's actually a very useful test. And this organic acid test gives me a very comprehensive idea about the gut and the neurotransmitters. But this is a urine test, which is very simple to do. I mean, most of these tests are expensive. That's the only problem. I think most things in life good things are expensive. That's the challenge. But I encourage my patients to do at least the gut function test if they are interested in changing their health, not just managing the symptoms.
Right. Next question is by Mr. Akshay Giridharan. He is asking, sir, need some more explanation for interpretation to gut microbiota. Can it be correlated to Krimi concept?
To a large extent, yes, yeah. Because, Krimi is described in Charaka Vimanasthana. If I'm wrong, correct me, okay? I think the third chapter, I think so. And when you think of Krimi, so there are some which, the descriptions of Raktada, Purishaja, and these Krimis, it makes you think, why did even Charaka think about those concepts? If Charaka did not have an idea about something else taking possession of our body, why would he be thinking about these concepts? So in a way, I would say from a theoretical perspective, yes, we can think of gut microbiome having a very close connection to the concept of krimis. I would even say, in fact, if we go back to the basics of Ayurveda, which is we are Panchabhaltic, right? And Bhuta literally means to possess, right? So in fact, when we think of the various descriptions of these krimis, there's Paishacha, and there are different names, Usually these names are used in old horror movies in South India. And, when I think of those, I kind of think, when they take possession of your body, of your gut. So you're right in actually studying the Krimi chapter of Charaka from a more scientific perspective might give us far more insight into Ayurveda's understanding of possibly gut microbiome.
Yes. Next question from Ganesh Sultanpur. He is asking scope of MPH for Ayush graduates, out of the way, that is out of Agni.
Right, okay. Yes, see, I did my master's in public health in New Zealand because I wanted to know. See, Ayurveda has so much of health promotion and health education aspect, because a lot of what we do is dinacharya, then Sattvavajaya, like in Trivida Aushadam, two of them is Sattvavajaya and Daiva Vyapashraya. I mean, even if you think of Daiva Vyapashraya as Daiva Vyapashraya, whether you believe it in or not, when you do those rituals, actually you have peace of mind, and the thing is, so Ayurveda is full of behavioral changes, how they can actually help in improving our health and well-being, not just of the individual, but of the communities. So MPH would be a great opportunity to kind of see how we can take Ayurveda into a more mainstream public health platform where we can say the value of Ayurveda in public health. So like through the College of Medicine, we are also looking at, how the key principles of Ayurveda can change the communities. So to answer your question, if you're passionate like I am about applying Ayurveda into the community, not just treatments, but behavioral changes, go for MPH and look for good institutions. There are very good institutions for MPH in India too, I think in Mumbai. And also I studied at the University of Auckland, which is one of a very good university for public health. Also University of Technology, Sydney, where I did my PhD. And there are lots of very good universities in the US for MPH, and Ayurvedic graduates, I say, who are interested in health promotion, health education, and research must, kind of explore MPH. And actually in about 2 days, I'm going to be talking about career opportunities for young Ayurveda graduates outside of India. So if you do stay tuned to or follow me on some of the social media, this is organized by a group of young Ayurvedic doctors in India. There I will specifically be talking about what career opportunities you have, and I'll be addressing MPH quite a lot in the talk. That's happening in 2 days on the 5th.
Thank you, sir. I would request then to just give us the link in
Sure.
our group so that I can text it to all the, or just continue, send it to all the delegates, and let every youngster get benefited by this. A very good information regarding the scope of Ayush doctors, young Ayush doctors. Next question is by Bharti Purohit. Please guide on markers test used for stool.
It's as I shared in my presentation, the markers of inflammation, the markers of absorption, like pancreatic elastase, marker for inflammation, calprotectin, and infection, like parasites and fungus and other bacterial infections. And also the various gut microbiota, the very species. So if you Google comprehensive test for stool analysis, you will come up with these 4 aspects. So markers for inflammation, absorption, immunity, and gut microbiome.
Now another question is from Kittu Singh, where he's asking why told about Purisha Raksha in case of Rajakshma. Why told that loose bowels in Rajakshma patient can lead to death? Balam tasya hit with balam, that concept. What is the pathophysiology behind it, and what would be the drug for loose stools in Rajakshma?
To be very honest, I don't treat infectious conditions myself. But I can, I'm sure, Professor Sharada and her colleagues will have much more expertise in actually suggesting what could be used. Maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, Kutaja might be useful because Kutaja is Amapachana as well. It is not just Tambana, but it's also Amapachana. And I also think, Trimada, which is Musta, Chitraka and Vidanga. So this Musta, Chitraka and Vidanga and Kutaja, I feel could be the way that you look for. But please do confirm with, those who have direct experience treating patients with the symptom of diarrhea who have tuberculosis. But, in terms of what you're saying, I find that concept also very interesting, that even our metabolic waste product, because it's so rich in healthy microbiome, when everything else is failing, maybe that also keeps us alive. Like having a good microbiome might actually keep us alive even when the whole body is degenerating. That's how I think of when Charaka says that Vidbalam is also a bala, for a patient of Kshaya.
Yes, sir. Next question is by Snigdha Satyakami. Whether both Virechana and Basti act on gut microbiota and how they nourishes them. Basti and Virechana.
Yeah, they both. Because, Virechana, really, I think of Virechana as an act is the final act. But then there's Deepana, there is Pachana, and, during that, there is Deepana, Pachana, Snehapana, and then there is Snehana, Svedana, all the Purva karmas culminating in Virechana, which really is by encouraging the detoxification processes. What I personally feel is that when you do a proper Virechana, you are establishing good detoxification. You are improving the metabolism of the liver, you're improving the metabolic processes. But then to repopulate the gut with a healthy microbiome, I would say you would have to follow it with Basti. The mechanism of action would basically be by the phytoconstituents, not just the phytoconstituents, because in Basti we use ghee and other animal products as well. So these constituents will trigger enzymatic reaction, which would send a message to the brain, and then that directs the digestive system. And so we are actually helping in repopulating the gut microbiome. So I would say Virechana, which is cleansing and detoxification, followed by Basti, would be a complete process of correcting someone's agni in practice. Because it's one thing to detoxify, but if you don't repopulate the gut microbiome, then you won't see a major change. So we would have to repopulate it, and that's where Basti is very important after Virechana.
That's why I think Basti has been also told as Sardha Chikitsa. All the chikitsas on one side and divided by 2 is the effect of Basti.
Yes.
Next question is by Sunil Chavan, wherein he is asking, do you find the cases of drug interactions while using Ayurveda drug along with allopathy drug?
Yeah, see, for the body, any substance is a substance, whether it is Ayurvedic or allopathic. The body doesn't know. It just understands biochemistry, right? So yes, you do. You have to be thorough in your approach. So what I do is I use certain genetic testing. What I do is pharmacogenomic testing. So some of my patients who have been on very long-term medications, if I don't know what those long-term medications are doing to them, I would actually ask them to go through a pharmacogenomic testing, where I'll know they metabolize certain drugs better, they don't metabolize certain drugs. Then I can inform their GPs and specialists, actually from this test I found that the medication that you're giving may not be the best one. And then they would come back and say, is there an alternative? Then I would introduce some Ayurvedic remedies for that. There are interactions. You have to be careful because, see, if somebody is having L-Dopa and they want Ayurvedic treatment, and you're going to say, oh, actually, I'm going to give Kapikachu because Kapikachu has a similar effect. What we are basically doing is we are simply just adding more medicines instead of actually, and the moment you start to give Kapikachu, and if they are still taking the conventional medications for the management of Parkinsonism, you actually see worsening of the symptoms or changes in the symptoms. Instead, you would have to actually do, while the neurologist is treating them with L-Dopa, it's better if we treat their agni. because then the need for those medications will also come down. And I mean, to answer your question, yes, there are interactions, because anything that is potent should have an adverse effect as well, and that's that is what nature is. Nature doesn't produce something which is powerful and have no side effects, because we don't consume it as nature produced. We use our yukti, right? So the way we apply. So for instance, what I would say is, if I'm giving my patient, say, who has very high cortisol levels in the morning, and I give them yashti, licorice, actually they become even more anxious, because licorice has that effect of actually increasing the cortisol production. So I would give them yashti in the afternoon or later in the evening, or mostly in the afternoon, where the energy levels go down. And I give ashwagandha to them in the morning. So it's very important to understand the interactions. But the truth is, we don't have much evidence. We have cell line and animal experimentation to kind of think about drug to herb interaction, but there are not been many clinical studies, because it's not possible to do it easily. But as a physician, as a practitioner, you can do it by very thorough case taking. And I would say, yeah, be careful. There are interactions.
Next question is by Dr. Ashwini Charchan. She's asking, Shirashula is one of the lakshanas of Purisha Vega Dharana. What is this pathophysiology?
It's an interesting question, because, like when I was studying BAMS, Professor Sharada was in my college, and, we also would look for other healers who would teach us more than what was taught just in our college. So, and I was looking for somebody who can teach me pulse diagnosis. I haven't learned it at all, because I don't think I have the skill for pulse diagnosis. So that's why I use a lot of scientific testing, which I think I'm more confident with. And when I was going to this person, he would always ask me, have you had a bowel movement this morning? And I would say, that's none of your business, whether I have a bowel movement or not. Why do you want to know that? But that teacher's explanation was this: if something is blocked in your gut, there will be a blockage in your head too, because the doshas have to flow. Apana, prano, dana, vyana, samana, udana, prano, dana, vyana, samana, apana. So anulomana is where the doshas are flowing in the normal direction. So the prana has to flow, and it has to take that anulomana direction. So when you think about Ayurvedic concepts, yes, of course, it makes so much sense that, if someone hasn't had a satisfactory bowel movement, they can't actually focus, which is very true. But, to answer your question, whether long-term constipation results in headaches, yes, it does. It does result in headaches. And there, I don't think doing an adrenal function test would help. That's not necessary. But doing a gut function test will give an idea, because if there is long-term constipation, it is very likely that they have inflammatory markers. And if the inflammatory markers are high, as you can imagine, that can result in vasoconstriction, or a disturbance in vasoconstriction and vasodilation, which results in headaches. Particularly in migraine headaches, there is a very strong correlation between gut health and the headaches. If you correct their gut health by understanding that, you can see that their migraine also starts to improve, even without treating their migraine, by treating the gut.
Yes. Ambuja Aarti is the next and on the line. She's asking, as we know, impairment of Kayagni leads to Ama formation. But what about Dhatwagni impairment? Will this also come under Ama concept? If so, how to differentiate clinically?
It's an excellent question. And I must say, I have certain concepts, but maybe I think, some of the more learned colleagues can embellish that. Yes, when we think about our cellular health, So when there is a disturbance in the gut, which is Jataragni, but then when we further look at our cellular health, the tissues, because a disturbance in the gut health can also impair the exchange of chemicals from inside the cell to the outside the cell. So what I've generally noticed is a mitochondrial dysfunction. Like those who complain of fatigue. If you think about chronic fatigue, let's say, take the example of chronic fatigue. So in chronic fatigue, no treatment usually works for them. And that's because their energy conversion at the cellular level, the mitochondrial function is affected. So this is where I feel that sometimes chronic fatigue may be triggered by a viral infection like Epstein-Barr virus, which you can find in most people. There, the virus would have affected the dhatu. And when the dhatu is affected, the energy conversion is affected. But then when the energy conversion is affected, then there is also that affects the processing of digestion, absorption, which affects the gut. But usually there is a combination of both. See, when my energy level is affected, when my dhatu is not functioning well, what do you do? When you are very tired, what do? You go to the refrigerator to find if you can eat something, or you go and eat something, right? I mean, most of us do that. Like when we are tired, we feel by eating, we might feel better. So what happens in, I think the body is also that when the dhatu agni is affected, it indirectly has an effect on the koshta agni. And when the koshta agni is affected, it has an effect on the dhatu agni. When we look at the conversion of the dhatus, like when we look at the formation of rasa rakta mamsa meda asti manja shukra through the various nyayas, we know that there is a connection between the dhatu agni and the koshta agni. In order to, how can you measure clinically if the dhatu agni is affected? What I would look for is, I would look for understanding mitochondrial functions. There are certain tests which give indication towards mitochondrial functioning. So there are certain tests. You can do certain blood tests where you can find what is happening in the Krebs cycle. You must all have studied Krebs cycle and forgotten, which most of us do because it's complex. You can actually identify if there are certain cofactors, certain enzymes which are lacking, which is actually affecting the Krebs cycle, which is how I would look at Dhatu Agni. If my Krebs cycle shows certain kind of deficiencies or errors, then I'm thinking actually my Dhatu Agni is also affected.
Yes. Vishnu Priya Sitaram is the next person who is putting a very good question again. Can patients with malignancy and lymphadenopathy both together having improper Agni be treated for good Agni? Can buttermilk help in this condition?
Buttermilk definitely can help in this condition, but Professor Sharda, would you repeat the first part of the question?
First part is, can patients with malignancy and lymphadenopathy, both together having improper Agni, be treated for good Agni?
Yes, yeah. There is a huge correlation between impaired gut microbiome and cancer. And also there is a huge relationship between those who are receiving cancer treatment and how it affects their gut microbiome. Because in cancer management, generally what is treated as the cancer markers, not the gut. So what Ayurvedic practitioners and functional medicine practitioners, holistic practitioners can do with those who actually are undergoing cancer treatment or diagnosed with cancer is to treat the gut. And I mean, you are right that using fermented foods can be one fantastic way to repopulate the gut microbiome in both these conditions.
Next question is by Dr. Chitralekha V. Krishna. Can you please throw light on Bhutagni and Dhatwagni involvements?
Okay, see, for me, Dhatwagni I've just explained in one of the previous questions that I look at Krebs cycle and how energy is converted, how mitochondria functions, and that's how I would look at it. When it comes to Bhuta Agni, I would say it is more conceptual. It is more understanding the concept of how the cells, because cell is the functional unit. So if we understand a cell, we can understand the biology, because it is the organization of cells in a very intelligent way to do specific functions is what becomes the tissues and the organs. Therefore, understanding the functioning of the cell would be Dhatu Agni in my view. And Bhuta Agni is given going further down, is like understanding the nature of, let's say, the atoms, the protons, the neutrons, and the electrons, and possibly, the individual components within the cellular proteins, amino acids that are involved. And, in some genetic conditions, I would say where I would consider a Bhuta Agni impairment is really when there are genetic conditions, where they're missing a SNP, or where they are missing a particular genetic factor, which is resulting in a genetic condition. So I would say, from my perspective, because I'm more a clinician, that I would think of genetic disorders having a certain correlation with Bhuta Agni, and that's when I would think of Bhuta Agni. And Dhatu and Koshta, I think I've explained that in previous questions.
Next question is by Dr. Ronad. He's from our college. He's asking the treatment of IBS.
The treatment of IBS, as we know, it's very important, first of all, rule out whether it is IBS or IBD. So if there is if there is calprotectin detected, then it is IBD. So it's an inflammatory bowel disease as opposed to IBS. IBS, as you know, the criteria is when there are no, it's a functional disease. So there, the treatment really is, to put it in simple words, to do eliminating anything which is non-nutritious. Like if they're having caloric dense, nutrient deficient foods, then to remove them, and then to encourage detoxification and elimination system. So I would say a clever way of applying Deepana Pachana and Anulomana would be a very good way to do, a very good way to treat IBS. And because IBS is not just physical, it has a psychological component, actually, to take into consideration mindfulness, practices, or pranayama, or meditation, and dinacharya. All of these will actually encourage the body to develop a circadian rhythm, which is free flowing. So there is less stress on the gut. So because anxiety and IBS are so very closely related that we would have to follow, a modern version of dinacharya based on those principles, and eating whole foods, not eating refined foods, but actually encouraging the person to eat whole foods, eat a variety of food, specific timings to eat food, and also to make everything digestible. So these are the ways how you can treat IBS. Besides, treating the symptoms through, if it is diarrhea dominant or constipation dominant, then you can either use Adhipatikara Churna, or you can use Triphala or other such combinations, depending on which symptom is more dominant.
Next question is from Dr. Mohit, where he's asking, can prebiotic given only in dysentery or even in constipation too?
Yeah, in fact, prebiotics can increase bowel movements. Okay, so probiotic can be given in both. Okay, but with prebiotic, we have to be careful that because these prebiotics are generally, they're insoluble fiber. And because they're insoluble fiber, they can actually cause some abdominal discomfort if there are not enzymes, or if the gut microbiome is not good enough actually to eat these insoluble fiber to produce good bacteria. So in dysentery, I would be careful about giving prebiotics, but it would become necessary. So you would have to give more soluble fiber than insoluble fiber. But in both, probiotics would be necessary.
Okay. Next question is by Anita. She's asking, sir, you were speaking about Sarva Rasabhyasa. Can you please share any information related to Vipaka and gut relation?
Vipaka. Yes, yeah. I mean, conceptually, yes. So what I think is, see, Ayurvedic physicians will understand this. See, for us, rasa and vipaka, rasa and virya are more important when we are giving herbs. Yeah, because aushadas, they act by their virya. Whereas when it comes to ahara, we should focus on rasa and vipaka, the post-digestive effect. So the way I see it in my practice is, there is systemic acidity and systemic alkalinity. So just listen to me carefully that I'm not talking about acidity as in acid reflux or amla pitta. I mean, can be amla pitta, but then not as in the disease amla pitta, okay? So when one eats foods which do not have neutral vipaka or madura vipaka, if it has more khatu vipaka, then it can result in a systemic acidity. And systemic acidity, you can equate it to inflammation. And that's where inflammatory markers become high. So if you're thinking about the concepts of alkaline food and acidic food, if you go on Google, you'll find a list of alkalinizing foods is what I think of as ones which have vipaka, which is not khatu, which is actually going to reduce systemic acidity. So a long-standing systemic acidity can result in inflammatory conditions like arthritis. It could be even in headaches, can be in autoimmune conditions, or even menstrual disorders. So there, I would think, putting focus on vipaka as acid-causing foods and alkaline, foods that generate an alkaline environment post-digestion is what I would be looking at.
Next question is from Dr. Sarvi. Again, he is also one of our faculty. He's asking, what do you say about Raktanasya for Shirogata Krimi?
To be honest, I don't have any experience in using that kind of intervention. I mean, in fact, to be honest, the most extreme nasya that I may have done is really with ginger powder. So, I think you should really talk to someone who is more experienced. I will not have any opinion because I have not used it.
Next question is from Swaranam Ballal. Nowadays, keto diet is getting popular. What are the effects of keto diet on gut microbiota?
Yeah, it's a very important and interesting question. And, I myself, went on a paleo keto for a long time. And what I noticed is until you have had all this bad microbiome, by doing keto, by doing paleo, you're getting rid of those bad microbiome because your keto diet is helping. But if you make it your lifestyle, unless there is an indication like, let's say, a neurological condition or let's say seizures, where it has a very good role, ketogenic diet, or even during cancer, ketogenic diet has a good role. But for most other individuals who may not have such extreme necessities, if we just follow keto, then populating the gut becomes important. And that cannot be achieved without a varied diet. The problem with keto diet is, while it's very effective, it can't be very varied. You can't have a varied diet. So I personally have come to believe that, yeah, it's okay for me to have a little bit of fat, age-related, it's all right. So I'm starting to eat more variety of foods, as long as they're whole foods. To answer your question, yes, keto diet has a very good role in changing the body's metabolism. See, generally we generally use sugar as a fuel, glucose burning, because glucose is our primary fuel. But then if we can teach our body to switch from glucose burning to ketone burning, where ketone can be used as a fuel source, it's a fantastic skill for the body to have. And when it becomes more ketone burning, then it starts to take the toxins out where they were all kind of stored, particularly in the adipose tissue or visceral fat. It's very useful in addressing metabolic syndrome, especially if someone's BMI is more than 25 or even more, around 30 in the initial phases. But then you would have to bring them back to a varied diet, because even with keto diet over a long period of time, your agni becomes low. So our body is built to, by nature, our human body is built to experience variety of foods. And it survives on that kind of variety of food and interacting with our environment. So the more you eat local food, regional food, but whole foods, okay? Not like I'm saying that, like because you live in Banaras, you start your breakfast with 6 jalebis. Not that way. Local as in not what is locally available in your shop, but in your environment. That already is good paleo and keto. So I would say, yeah, keto has a place, but not as a lifestyle. At least in my opinion, in my clinical practice, I've found, even personally, keto has a like what we in India do, vrata, where for 4 months I do keto and then I go back to my normal. That actually works for me better.
Good. Now there are a few questions from Bharati Purohit. She has asked, I think we can give some solutions for diabetic neuropathy in terms of agni and gut microbiome.
It's a very interesting thought. I haven't treated anybody with diabetic neuropathy using a gut microbiome approach. However, I actually have read that neuropathies, even diabetic, definitely if you do gut microbiome, it is going to actually help in, see, what happens in diabetes is like the sugar is constantly rotting the system. Sugar is like a fungus in the wall. It keeps rotting slowly. And so it keeps killing the cells, or actually making the cells less efficient, not killing. So the moment you address the gut microbiome will actually reduce your cravings for sugar. It will balance your sugar better. So all the complications of sugar dysregulation can be handled with gut microbiome. So in that sense, yes, diabetic neuropathy, theoretically should be it should be possible to help somebody with diabetic neuropathy by correcting the gut microbiome.
Another question she has posted: in diabetic patients, we get insomnia as well as depression. I think you have some good solutions in the form of agni and prameha.
Yes, yeah, see, in any long-standing dysfunction of the agni, metabolic syndrome, let's think of, diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular diseases, obesity, and disturbed thyroid functions. These are long-standing agni disorders. There, it doesn't just stop at physical symptom. It will always have an effect on the mind as well. Therefore, by correcting the agni through what we just have spoken about in answering different questions, yes, you are right. It is possible to address both aspects, because there is the connection between the gut and the mind. Everything that affects the gut affects the mind. That's what I put in one slide. So think anything that affects the gut will affect the mind. So if you do the opposite, it should also have a positive effect.
Thank you. One Dr. Suhas Shetty has also answered few of the queries. So thanks to him. On the chat, he has answered. And one was, he has given the reference for Krimi Chikitsa Vimanasana 7th chapter.
Okay.
7th chapter. Thanks to Suhas Shetty also. Before I continue, I would like to just say a sincere apologies if I have not addressed few of the doctors at doctors, because on the phone it has been shown only with a name, so unable to make out whether they are student or a doctor. So, and because the constraints of time also, I can't do much things. So wherever there it is being mentioned on my screen as doctor, I have addressed doctor. If not, if I have missed out, so please, that is not intentionally or anything. You have to excuse me for that. That was a very good interactive session. I think this is the first day wherein a lot of questions were there. And as a Kaya Chikitsa person, I can say Agni is really great that even the questions were so great. And I think these are the questions, and we can continue this. And finally, we are coming to the verge of end of the session. I would request now Dr. Raghavendra Vishtar to conclude with the Thanksgiving. I request Raghavendra sir.
Thank you, madam. Gurubhyo Namaha. Good evening. Myself, Dr. Raghavendra P. Shettar, coordinator of Trividha Aushadham. Today, my words are not enough to express the gratitude on behalf of organizing committee of international webinar on Trividham Aushadham. I would like to thank today's great speaker, Dr. Vijay Murthy sir, head of Ayurveda Medicine Research Institute, United Kingdom, who has delivered a wonderful speech on how to diagnose the gut and brain function in treating the cause. He has given a wonderful talk over the scientific approach to Agni Chikitsa. Hope all session went fruitful and enhanced the knowledge about the concept of Agni Chikitsa. Thereby, I am very thankful to Dr. Vijay Murthy sir on behalf of management, principal, staff, and students of Rajiv Gandhi Education Society's Ayurvedic Medical College Road. Thank you very much, sir, for providing a wonderful platform to interact with you in a international webinar. So, I take this opportunity to thank President of Rajiv Gandhi Education Society Road, Sri G.S. Patil sir, Honorable Secretary Dr. K.B. Dhannur sir, and Chairman Sri I.S. Patil sir, Rajiv Gandhi Ayurvedic Medical College Road, for this moral support. A special thanks to our beloved principal, Dr. I.B. Kotrushiti sir, for constant encouragement and support. I would like to extend my thanks to Jishnu and team for digital support. A special thanks to all delegates and YouTube viewers for making this event very colorful. Thank you, and all. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Raghavendra sir, for your vote of thanks. We would conclude this session by just reminding and giving an information that tomorrow we will again meet here at 5 o'clock sharp with a speaker, renowned speaker again from Kerala, from Kannur, Dr. T.S. Krishnakumar sir, and he is going to speak on a very interesting subject. It is role of Daiva Pashaya Chikitsa in Manasa Roga. Because this is Trividham Aushadham. One aspect is Yukti Vipashaya, one aspect is Sattva Vajaya. We had already one speakers for that. And today it was the deep core subject of the Yukti Vipashaya and Department of Kaya Chikitsa subject Kaya Chikitsa. And tomorrow we will be having a very informative session on Daiva Pashaya Chikitsa. So thank you. Thank you, Vijay sir, and thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Namaste.